Republicans enter the 2026 Senate elections with a 4-seat cushion after flipping 4 seats last November. That leaves Democrats at a fundamental disadvantage, and the map doesn't do them any favors either. Of the 13 seats that they are defending next November, 2 are in states that Donald Trump carried in 2024, Michigan and Georgia. Another 5 Democrat-held seats are in states that Kamala Harris carried by a single-digit margin: New Mexico, Minnesota, Virginia, New Jersey, and New Hampshire. Meanwhile, Republicans are defending just 1 seat in a state that Harris won, Susan Collins' seat in Maine, and North Carolina is the only other GOP-held seat in a state that Trump won with a single-digit margin. Bottom line, the map heavily favors Republicans. That said, in today's video, I am going to fill out the map with my latest predictions in each race, using a mix of the fundamentals, that's the partisan lean of each state, recent election results, demographic trends, expert forecasts, and of course, the latest polling that we've got. Let's start with the obvious. Some seats are safely in each party's column. For Democrats, there is little reason to worry about Oregon, where incumbent Jeff Merkley is seeking a 4th term. Now, Oregon voted for Harris by 14 points in 2024, seeing one of the smallest shifts in the country towards Trump nationally, and Merkley won his last 2 races by more than 15 points each. There's no indication that 2026 will be any different. I also expect John Hickenlooper to comfortably win re-election in Colorado, which he has said will be his final term in the Senate. He was first elected back in 2018 after 2 terms as governor, and he will benefit from the fact that Colorado has shifted further to the left than any other state over the past decade. Over in Illinois, longtime Democratic Senator Dick Durbin has announced that he won't seek a 6th term, setting off a scramble among several prominent Illinois Democrats eager to capitalize on a rare open seat. Right now, Lieutenant Governor Juliana Stratton is the betting favorite with a 65% chance to secure the nomination according to Kalshi. That said, this one should remain safely in the Democratic column, regardless of who is nominated. Republicans simply don't have a strong enough candidate to overcome the state's deep blue fundamentals. Finally, in the Northeast, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New Jersey, Delaware, and Virginia are all safe Democratic holds as well, with incumbents expected to run for re-election in each state. It will be worth paying close attention to the margins in Virginia and New Jersey's competitive governor races later this year, as they will offer the first real test of Donald Trump's 2nd-term popularity at the state level. New Jersey did trend significantly towards Trump in the 2024 presidential race, but it remains a fundamentally Democratic-leaning state, and the incumbent Senator Cory Booker remains very popular. And while Virginia was also decided by a single-digit margin in 2024, incumbent Mark Warner is signaling that he intends to run for a 4th term. In that case, the only factor that could make this race competitive is if outgoing Governor Glenn Youngkin throws his hat into the ring. Alrighty, now for the Republicans, there are so many deeply red states on this map that they are barely worth discussing individually. The only retirements that we know of so far are Mitch McConnell in Kentucky and Tommy Tuberville in Alabama, who is running for governor. But that won't change much, as Kentucky and Alabama remain 2 of the most reliably Republican states in the nation. All told, these 15 solid states bring the Republican total to 47 seats, already just 3 shy of the 50 that they need to retain control of the Senate, given that the Vice President, J.D. Vance, holds the tie-breaking votes. Now, there is an outside chance that the races in Alaska, Kansas, South Carolina, or Florida could grow more competitive, especially if 2026 turns into a strong blue wave. That being said, in Alaska, with former Democratic Congresswoman Mary Peltola more likely to run for governor instead of Senate, incumbent Republican Dan Sullivan does appear to have a clear path to re-election. Similarly, in Kansas, outgoing Democratic Governor Laura Kelly has made it clear that she is absolutely not running for another office, paving the way for Senator Roger Marshall to cruise to a 2nd term. Then in South Carolina, Senator Lindsey Graham is also expected to face a smoother path than he did in 2020, when, despite being out-fundraised by Democratic challenger Jamie Harrison, he still won by double digits. And then in Florida, as long as newly appointed Senator Ashley Moody secures the GOP nomination, Republicans are in strong shape to hold the seats. That leaves us with just 10 states now, still without a rating, each of which is either expected to be competitive or carries enough uncertainty that assigning a safe rating at this stage would simply be too premature. Let's start in New Mexico, one of the 5 Senate seats the Democrats are defending in a state that Harris carried by single digits back in 2024. The incumbent is Ben Ray Lujan, elected to his first term in 2020 with a 6-point win over Republican Mark Ronchetti, who is relatively unknown at the time. However, according to split tickets, wins above replacement score, Lujan underperformed fundamental expectations by more than 5 points, suggesting that he's not that strong of a candidate. That said, without a credible Republican challenger, this seat is still very likely to remain in Democratic hands. Then there's Texas, which once again teased Democrats before slapping them in the face this past November. The Lone Star State saw the 6th largest Republican swing between 2020 and 2024, with Donald Trump expanding his 5.5-point margin all the way up to 14. That effectively dashed any hopes the Democrats had of unseating 4-term Republican Senator John Cornyn here in 2026. But the dynamic has shifted now that Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton is primarying Cornyn, setting the stage for a high-stakes clash between the GOP establishment and its more hardline conservative base. These two have long been at odds, with Paxton accusing Cornyn of being insufficiently conservative, while Cornyn has pointed repeatedly to Paxton's legal troubles, including his 2023 impeachment by the GOP-led Texas House. So far, neither Trump nor Senator Ted Cruz has endorsed a candidate, with Trump's endorsement considered critical in deciding the winner of the primary. Paxton has thus far led Cornyn in every single poll conducted so far, and usually by double digits. But Cornyn does hold the incumbency advantage and a substantial war chest, plus endorsements from several prominent U.S. senators. If Cornyn survives the primary, he would likely win re-election comfortably, and Texas would probably be in the safe Republican column on my map. But if Paxton secures the nomination, the general election could tighten significantly, especially if a Democrat like Colin Allred or Beto O'Rourke jump into the race. The latest general election polling shows Paxton leading Allred by just 2 points and O'Rourke by 4, compared to Cornyn's leads of 4 and 6, respectively. For now, Texas remains in the likely Republican column, though if Paxton becomes the nominee, again, don't be surprised if it shifts to lean Republican. Up in Nebraska, Republican Pete Ricketts is running for his first full term in the Senate. He's not especially popular, even within his own party, and there is a real possibility that Dan Osborne could return as an independent candidate after coming within 7 points of defeating Republican Deb Fischer last fall. Osborne proved himself as a formidable fundraiser and successfully positioned himself as neither a Democrat nor a Trump-aligned Republican, and that allowed him to pull support from independents, soft Republicans, and Democrats alike. For now, though, this one stays in the likely Republican column, though it could heat up quickly depending on how that field shapes up. Then right next door in Iowa, Republican Senator Joni Ernst sparked controversy earlier this month during a town hall, and that prompted several Democrats to jump into the race, seeing an opening in a state that has shifted sharply to the right over the past decade. Trump carried Iowa by 13 points in 2024, the largest margin for either party since 1972 in Nixon's 49-state landslide. But Ernst's comments, combined with the entries of J.D. Scholten and State Senator Zach Walz for the Democrats, have led both the Cook Political Report and Sabato's Crystal Ball to move the race into the likely Republican column. And I am inclined to follow their lead, placing Iowa alongside Nebraska and Texas in that same likely Republican tier. And with that, Republicans are now projected to win 50 Senate seats. Again, that would be enough to retain their majority, with Vice President J.D. Vance holding the tie-breaking votes. Next is Minnesota, where Democrat Tina Smith has announced that she will not seek a second term, making this the first U.S. Senate race in the state without an incumbent since 2006. That also happens to be the last time that Republicans won a federal election in Minnesota. Looking ahead to 2026, Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan currently holds the early edge in the Democratic primary, with Congresswoman Angie Craig seen as the next most likely contender. On the Republican side, the most prominent name in the race so far is former NBA player Royce White, but he just lost to Amy Klobuchar by 16 points in 2024. So unless the GOP manages to recruit a significantly stronger candidate, Flanagan, or whoever the Democrats nominate, should be favored to win comfortably. And shifting across the Great Lakes, let's head to Michigan, where Democrat Gary Peters is also stepping down. Now, this one poses more of a challenge for Democrats, given that they narrowly lost Michigan in the 2024 presidential race. While Democrat Alyssa Slotkin did manage to narrowly hold on to the state's open Senate seat last cycle, she did so by just 20,000 votes over former Republican Congressman Mike Rogers, who has now officially entered the 2026 race again. On the Democratic side, meanwhile, with both Pete Buttigieg and outgoing Governor Gretchen Whitmer declining to run, the party lacks a clear top-tier name. Congresswoman Haley Stevens is currently the frontrunner among declared candidates, with State Senator Mallory McMorrow close behind. Now, Stevens has slightly overperformed fundamentals in her last 3 House races by about 1 or 2 points, but it's nothing especially notable. So as long as Republicans avoid a major misstep, like nominating Tudor Dixon again, they should have a solid shot at flipping this seat. For now, though, I am placing Michigan in the tilt Democrat column, considering the fundamentals should favor them in 2026. It's also worth mentioning that the party has a well-established track record of winning down-ballot races here over the last decade. Down in Ohio, we are looking at a special election to fill the remainder of the Senate term that was vacated by Vice President J.D. Vance. Republican Governor Mike DeWine appointed his Lieutenant Governor John Husted to the seat, and Husted is now running as an unelected incumbent. On the Democratic side, former Senator Sherrod Brown is reportedly eyeing a run for governor against Vivek Ramaswamy, which could actually put him on a collision course with another prominent Democrat, former Congressman Tim Ryan, who has also expressed interest in the governor's race. Brown and Ryan are by far the Democrats' strongest potential contenders, so the fact that neither of them may enter this Senate race is welcome news for the GOP. Husted, meanwhile, is probably going to be a strong candidate in his own right, with plenty of statewide experience, having previously served as Secretary of State and as Lieutenant Governor. Thus, without Brown or Ryan in the race, this would probably be a safe Republican hold. But as long as there is still a chance that Sherrod Brown jumps in, this race stays in the likely Republican column for now. Alrighty, let's head up to New England now, where we have 2 uniquely interesting contests. In New Hampshire, Democratic Senator Jeanne Shaheen is also retiring, and Congressman Chris Pappas is the first to enter the race to succeed her, and at this point, he's likely to remain the most prominent Democrat in the field. And unfortunately for Republicans, former Governor Chris Sununu did decide against running. He would have been their strongest possible contender by a long shot. Instead, it now looks like former Massachusetts Senator Scott Brown will likely win the GOP nomination. He's a strong candidate in his own right, and in a red wave year, he might actually be favored over Pappas. But New Hampshire does lean blue on the fundamentals, and again, 2026 should be a good year for Democrats, so I've got this race in the lean Democratic column for now. Up in Maine, Republican Senator Susan Collins is a political unicorn. Back in 2020, nearly every single poll and analyst predicted her defeat, yet she beat Democrat Sarah Gideon by 8 points, even as Joe Biden carried Maine by 9. To this day, she remains the only Republican to win a Senate race in a state that was simultaneously carried by a Democratic presidential nominee since 2004. Looking ahead to 2026, Maine is the only Republican-held seat in a state that Kamala Harris won, and thus it is widely considered Democrats' top pickup opportunity. Yet their best possible challenger, Congressman Jared Golden, has declined to run. If he did run, Democrats probably would have been favorites, but without him, their most established option is outgoing Governor Janet Mills, who doesn't necessarily boast awe-inspiring approval numbers. So right now, I do have to give Collins the slight edge. It's essentially a toss-up, but given Collins' track record, she remains the narrow favorite, even though on fundamentals alone, the state does lean more Democratic than New Hampshire. Alrighty, to wrap things up, let's go down the Atlantic coastline and come to the two highest profile races of the cycle, North Carolina and Georgia. There's a good chance that when we look back on 2026, these two contests will define it. In North Carolina, Republican Tom Tillis is expected to seek a third term, although he may face a primary challenge. Much like Cornyn in Texas, Tillis has long been associated with the establishment wing of the party, and was even censured by the North Carolina GOP over his bipartisan support for gun control and same-sex marriage. Former RNC co-chair Lara Trump and Congressman Pete Harrigan have both been floated as potential challengers. That being said, it's probably in the Republican Party's best interest to stick with Tillis, considering that it does appear increasingly likely that Roy Cooper will in fact run for the Democrats. The former governor is the strongest non-incumbent in the country. He maintained strong approval ratings throughout his 2 terms, his universal name recognition in North Carolina, and an established fundraising network. If it does come down to Tillis versus Cooper, I would expect a razor-thin margin, and that's backed up by the polling. Cooper has led in all 4 public surveys so far, but only by narrow margins, ranging from +1 to +4. Ultimately, like in Maine and in Michigan, this race is effectively a toss-up, but if I had to lean one way, I'd probably right now give the slight edge to Cooper. Finally, in Georgia, outgoing Governor Brian Kemp is not running for Senate, arguably the worst news that Republicans may get all cycle long. Like Cooper, Kemp would have been the strongest non-incumbent candidate for Republicans, and likely would have been favored to unseat Democratic Senator Jon Ossoff, despite Ossoff actually being a strong candidate in his own right. After all, he did make history in 2020 by revolutionizing political fundraising in Georgia and winning a high-profile runoff against then-incumbent Republican David Perdue. Without Kemp, Republicans don't have a remotely comparable replacement. Congressman Buddy Carter is the biggest name to have entered the race thus far, though another congressman, Mike Collins, is the betting favorite, albeit with just a 40% chance of securing the nomination. Neither candidate is all that awe-inspiring, especially in a race of this magnitude. It's also worth pointing out that while most of the country swung sharply to the right between 2020 and 2024, Georgia and North Carolina did not. These states are undergoing gradual demographic shifts that continue to benefit Democrats, expanding and diversifying urban areas, and an influx of college-educated transplants from more liberal-leaning regions of the country. Put it all together, and Ossoff now holds a clear edge in what was once shaping up to be Republicans' best flip opportunity. So that gives us a projected 52 to 48 Republican majority, with Democrats gaining 2 seats. That's just my current read, based on where the national environment and candidate dynamics stand today. But as always, it's still early, and the map can shift fast. As always, feel free to share your thoughts on the map in the comments and suggest any other videos or topics you'd like for me to cover. That does it for today's video. Shout out to my channel members listed in the description below. Don't forget to subscribe and leave a like if you enjoyed the content. Check out more of my videos here. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. EP out.